Ruchem Aboim B'Shem Hashem B'Shem Irgen Shirter. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov's Mishlit on Hilchos Melamed, the Melamed, a halachic perspective. It's close to sponsoring a shir called Irgen Shirter 718-851-8651, an email ist@yeshivanet.com. Rav Smith.
The emphasis, the subject of today, Melamed in halacha. The word Melamed is lav dafka. We think of Melamed of younger children. A Melamed is anybody that's zaycha to be a Melamed Torah Lama Yisrael. We Melamed, a Mechanech, a rebbi, and I should mention almost all of what we'll speak today is also about Negeya Chinuch Habanim, raising one's children or grandchildren. And the emphasis, I was always afraid to talk about this subject of a Melamed. Don't forget, at least in my eyes, our children, our grandchildren, rebbeim are the greatest heroes. They're doing our work, they're Mechanech our children, our grandchildren, in these difficult times when the Nisyanis and Chinuch are, in a certain sense, Shlei Sarma Vayseinu. You know, every day they're on the front lines, or sometimes we could say they're in ground zero, dealing with their children and the problems that their children face. And it's not my place to tell Mechanchem what to do, Melamdim what to do. You know, Al Tadnas Chaveyach Shadagil and Mekoymai. You know, we always think when we talk about Mechanchem, Melamdim, the Gemara in Bava Basra, Daf Ches, and of course we focus on the word Kaychavim. Chazal explain why are Melamdim comparable to Kaychavim, to stars. Sort of many different pshatim. I guess the most simple pshat is you look up in the sky, the stars are tiny. You can't even see them come out, but they're really so big. But we don't see the greatness of them, and that's really one of the problems of being a mechanech. It's underappreciated. We don't realize the godless of the mechanchim, and there are other pshatim in kaychavim, but I like to focus on the word la'olam vo'ed. A mechanech is forming a child. That's a formation forever. He'll be a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, his dairis. It's all because the koyche that the malamdim put into the children. And there's a lot more to say, but I want to be moist in my door. I am not telling Mechanchem what to do. It's not my place. It's not certainly, it's wrong in my eyes. I have great respect, and that's where it ends. What we'll do is we have shilas over the years. We heard shilas, and Pashit, we're going to look into the Torah, the endless source of information to all of our questions, and hopefully we'll have what to give over. And if Lamdim want to listen, that's up to them. But again, it's a regular sugya. There's not a musa shmuz. The Shulchan Aruch Yeridei Simareish Memhei devotes a whole simon, 22 seifim, to Hilchos Melamdim. And I should mention, it was incredible Kvayt Shemayim that we saw, Kvayt HaTorah, Kvayt Shemayim we saw before Pesach, the wonderful, wonderful organization Chazdei Leiv that has rallied Klal Yisrael, literally, to show the Akaras HaToiv to the heroes, the Melamdim. There were over 500 tractor trailers of food that were given out on that day right before Pesach, and it's more than the assistance that they're giving, it's bringing us to the realization that they have to be our heroes. They have to be the subject of our Akaras HaToiv. So again, I don't talk to Melamdim, they know what they're doing. I just want to look at the Torah and try to find a little guidance into the sugya of Hilchos Melamdim. Noteworthy, as I told you, it's a whole siman, Reish Memhei and Yeridei. The first few halachas talk about a parent. The chiyuv a parent has to mechanech his child. After all, the pasuk, the Torah Kedoshah says, "V'limadatem oisem es b'neichem." And taka Yeridei Reish Memhei Aleph mitzvah say ala ish l'lamed es b'nei Torah. And I think there's a message there. You know, we talk about chinuch, Melamdim. We can't forget that the job of chinuch is on us, parents. The Melamdim are kind enough to do our job, but it's not like it's their job, that his panasa, let him be busy with it. It's our job. And very often we can't do it, we don't have the abilities, we don't have the time. So he's doing us the favor, he's doing our job. Plus, don't forget, and this Melamdim could tell right away in a child if the parents are involved or not. The success of a child, of a talmid, is how much the parents are involved. So it's not like I pay my tuition and now I'm potter. Chas v'sholom, the ikar chiyuv is on the parents. As far as the rebbe is concerned, that's another mitzvah say. It's interesting. The pasuk says, besides that we know v'limadatem oisam v'shinantem levanecha. So Chazal darshan shinant levanecha elu talmidim. And the Rambam in Seif HaMitzvahs, Mitzvah Aleph, that's the Rambam also in the Yad briefly, there's a mitzvah say deraisa to teach Torah. So it's not just a parnasa that a Rebbe has, it's a mitzvah say of V'shinantam levanecha. In fact, the Rishonim disagree, is it two separate mitzvahs or one? Is it the general mitzvah, l'madatem ha'isem as b'neichem, either a Rebbe or a talmid, or it's two different mitzvahs? But no doubt about it, Mechaba and Siv Gimel, mitzvah kol chochem Yisrael, l'lamed l'talmidim. Shenema, and because why? Shenantam levanecha, elu ha-talmidim. So again, the Melamed is lav dafka, the Melamed that teaches young children. Now, we'll soon see there is a special chashivus for the Torah of Tinoik Shel Beis Rabban, which is a young age, that's true. But as far as the skulas, the milas, the greatness of the Melamed is at any age. I just saw the Shalom Meishiv in Tinyana, Aleph Yud Gimel. There's a whole scandal there that the Rebbe came to a city and they ran him out of town. They didn't want, he's making too much noise. So he said, people tainted, even though, as we'll soon see, the Gemara says that a yeshiva is allowed to come into a neighborhood because you can't protest because the noise of the children, because we need Torah. But he says, somebody came along and a fatpeit with narishkai divrei shtus v'ruach, that the only heta is establishing a yeshiva of young children. But older boys, yeah, you can't come to a residential area. He says it's divrei shtus ve'ein tzarich tshuva. It doesn't dignify a response, because when Chazal say that the limud Torah of limud dardiki or even of melamdim, it's not only young children. Do you know that the Marik in the Tshuva in Ayin Beis refers to himself as a melamed tinoikis, even though he was a Rosh Hashiva? It's Yadua, the Prima Godim writes about himself, Yosef mikra dardiki milavov. Prima Godim Ein Shenemal was a melamed dardiki. Reb Chaim Volozhin would sign Chaim Melamed Torah Be'ir HaTorah Volozhin. And we need more than the Bari Olam. Every day we make a bracha, HaMelamed Torah L'Ama Yisrael. A very honorable title, but it doesn't only refer to younger children, anybody who's zayich to teach Torah. So we'll use the word Melamed, rebbi, mechanech, and I should mora for teaching girls, interchangeably. The first halacha in Hilchos Melamdim is a great introduction, a great start into the sugya. As I told you earlier, there's a Mishnah in Bava Basra Daf Chav Amud Beis that a person can't open a business in a residential area. You can't open a little business, a little store in your house, because the neighbors don't like it. There's too much traffic, there's too much noise, people are coming and going. That's the Mishnah in Chav. The one exception of the Mishnah is for Tinoikos. Why is Tinoikos different? What does Tinoikos mean? Why is it different? So the Gemara tells us the history of the Melamed. Zakti Gemara that in the times of Yeshua ben Gamgamala, Rashi says he was the Kohen Gadol in the times of the second base HaMikdash. He realized that people that had fathers and taught them Torah knew, so there was a chance the child will learn Torah. But let's say he doesn't have a father, or the father is incapable of teaching. What's going to be with Torah? So he instituted, there's a whole arichas be instituted in every city, even a small city, every Medina, every city, there has to be a Melamed Tinoikis. It's a takana, mimois, bayis sheni, every city has to have a Melamed. Now the actual yeshiva was later, but the Melamed was a takana from the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash. But interestingly enough, this is the chiyuv. The Shulchan Aruch in the end of Reish Mem Hey says, therefore, since every city has to have a Melamed, a yeshiva could open up even in a residential area, because the Klal Yisrael needs the yeshivas all over. There's a lot to say, but this is halacha l'maisa, that the chiyuv of having melamdim b'chol ir v'ir. Rav Moshe in Yeridei Chelik Beis Kuf Tezvav asked a question that typical in the early 20th century, when there was a city that had only enough money to either finance a mikveh or have yeshiva. So Rav Moshe said, well, if, it's pashut, if there's a city close by, and he gave the city was New Brunswick, and nearby was Elizabeth, and they had a mikveh, so there's no shayla. But even if it means in a city that there won't be a mikveh, he says the Melamed has to go first, because mikveh is, of course, karis is one issa. Chinuch melamdim is tayag mitzvahs. So again, even if it comes to that, Rachmana litzlan, but the chiyuv of the Melamed is of paramount importance. But what's interesting, the Akdama to Hilchas Melamdim is another halacha based on a Gemara. Shabbos Kuf Yutes, Kol Ir She'ein Ba Tinoki Shel Beis Rabam, Machriven Oisei. Imagine, you have to get up and destroy a city. If it still doesn't help, then Ravina says Machriven Oisei. Rashi says Machrim is worse than Machriv. Because Machriv means you destroy it, but something left. Machriv means there's no zeich of the city. Now it's a pliya. What's going on here? What is this, an ir nidachas? So Zok the Maral in the Sif Torah Perek Yud, because since, as we know from countless Chazal, that the rebbeim created the world for limud HaTorah, if there's no limud HaTorah, there's no world. If there's a city without limud HaTorah, that's a city, that's a small world without Torah. It doesn't have a schus hakiyum. So you have to destroy the city. Machriv, and then Machrim every last bit of it. And he says even the last detail, Chayrim is Yoisem min achurba, because a city without Torah is a head of gomor of schus kiyum. And again, the Maral typically writes Dvarim the Floyim with pashtus, but he makes the cheshbon. If there's no Torah, there's no schus kiyum. And that's the Maisa Paskin and Shulchan Aruch. First, the Mechaber says in Siv Zayin, in every city there has to be Melamed Tinoikis, and a city that doesn't have a Melamed is Machriven Oisai, Machrimen Oisai. It doesn't have the schus kiyum. Now this, of course, is the best introduction to what a Melamed is, the importance of Melamed. He is the schus kiyum in a city, in the yeshiva, in our lives. That's the schus kiyum. But there's more to it. The Gemara says in Shabbos, Kuf Yotes, Al Tigu b'Mashichai, Elu Tanoiki Shel Beis Rabba. So the one word to describe our kindlech, our heilige Tanoiki Shel Beis Rabba, is Mashichai. So Rashi says a chiddush to Kipshat. What does it mean Mashichai? Because you smear them with oil. Marsha says it's a shtickle of a doichik. So does Ben Yoyada, and Marsha learns the pshat that the word Mashichai is from the lashon of chashivus, like lemoshcha. That the talmidim shebeis rabbam, they are the most chashiv learning that we have. The Ben Yoyada says another pshat, the limud Torah of Tanoiki shebeis rabbam goes to the highest place in Shemayim, and just like Shemen rises to the top, so too limud tashbar is above all. Now this is not stam gesagt, because the Gemara says, also in Shabbos, Ein olam iskayim el b'shvil hevel tinoiki shel beis rabbim. The world exists because of the learning of the young children. So our papa asked Abaya, Didi v'didcha mai? What do we, like in America, what do we, chop liver? Our Torah is nothing. They're learning. Okay, I'm achshav them. But what about me and you, Abaya and Rapapa? So he said, excuse me, Ein edaim al hevel piv sheyesh b'chet lehevel she'ein b'chet. Listen, we might be nice people, but ain't sadik words as yastoi v'lo yechda. Tinoiki shel beis rabbim have no chet, because they're too young to do chet. I mean, they do things wrong, but they're so young, they're not accountable. It's unbelievable. This is Gepaskin and Shulchan Aruch. A learning of a young child, very young, here it's taka very young, is bigger than Abaya and Rapapa. So Abaran, in the first shmuz in Chelik Daled, God, he said it to of a bar mitzvah, I think of an anikel, he says, what's shot? A child is learning, he's not even a bar chayuva. It's an Ein Mitzvah. How could that be bigger than the learning of the Chafetz Chaim? So he says it Davar Nifla Moed. Besides the Kiyam Mitzvah of Limud HaTorah, there's the Torah, the Chefetz of Torah. And Torah doesn't change even if it's learned by a young child. But the young child has Torah b'tahara, without a chet. So Torah b'tahara is not totally in Kiyam Mitzvah Zochiv. When a child learns Torah, that Torah is greater than the Torah of Rabbi and Rapapa. It's not my Chiddush. This is the Gemara. Rabbi just gives it an understanding. It's not totally in Kiyam Mitzvah. But what's really striking, the same Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Yotes, Ein bevatlen Tanekah shel Beis Rabim, afil lebinyan Beis Hamikdash. That means Mashiach will come. It's going to be all over. Today we have a world of Pirsum. Everybody's going to know about it. The children are going to want to run to help to build the Beis Hamikdash. The Rebbe is going to have the hardest day of his career. Keep the kids in the classroom and not to run to the Binyan Beis Hamikdash. But you might wonder, wait a second, the Rebbe's not staying, he's going to build the Beis Hamikdash. Zokti Aruch HaShulchan HaOsid, he wrote a whole set on Hilchas L'Mashicha, Hilchas Beis HaBechira, the end of Siman Gimel, that the Rebbe's mechuyev to stay with his talmidim. That's part of building talmidim to Beis Rabbim. That's not nitcha for binyan Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara Sarid, the Shagasari, and Tainis Aflam says the same thing. And this is also the paskin in Shulchan Aruch. Sif Yud Gimel, ein mevatlan tinoikos afil binyan Beis Hamikdash. So it always bothered me. The Shulchan Aruch is not Hilchas L'Mashicha. That's Aruch HaShulchan HaOsid. Everything the Shulchan Aruch writes is as they gave us today. Why did Mechava put this in Shulchan Aruch? You know why? It's not Hilchas HaMashiach. Every day of a child's life, he has to be told, and the Rebbe has to understand, that this learning today is more important than Binyan Beis Hamikdash. When the child gets that feeling, he'll learn better. It might be a good idea. rebbeim occasionally say, don't forget, if Mashiach comes soon, we're going to continue learning. So let's learn with the same chashivus now. It's not a Hilchas L'Mashiach. So that's definitely the understanding, the appreciation, a little bit of it. Now, Pam used to quote the Kavayosha in Simonai and Beis, that the Kavayosha quote to Zoya, that when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the Heilige Rashbi, wanted to be Mekabel Pnei Ashchina, he would go to the classroom, to Tanekah shel Beis Rabbim, because he says, I want to be Mekabel Pnei Ashchina. So the Kavayosha explained, because the Maisa in a classroom of Tanekah shel Beis Rabbim, that's the greatest concentration of Pnei Ashchina. And I would think it's a good idea when the rebbeim are very makpatak, and that's the way it should be, to keep the classroom clean. First of all, it's good emotionally, psychologically. You live in a area of disarray. It's not good for the children. But it's also a way of reminding them of what they're doing. It's a good idea to tell the children, let's keep the classroom clean, because in this classroom, the Shechinah is here. The Messiah says, Michmei ape shchinta. So it's besides that it's good, emotionally the children should have a clean classroom. It's a way of reminding them of their very prominent role. No one, if you would see the Chafetz Chaim learning, no one would just disturb him for anything. I wonder if we could say that learning of Tashbar needs more of a Zehirus, because that learning is more chashiv than even Abai and other Gedolei. This is a little bit of an introduction. I was given as a gift a wonderful sefer, Matzlikei Rabim Kikachavim. If someone is a rebbi, wants to be a rebbi, it should be required reading. It's a whole sefer, the greatness of the Melamdim, and of course the Loimdim, the Tanekah shel Beis Rabbim. But now let's apply this more specifically. The Gemara in Bava Basha Daf Chaf Aleph, which I guess is the right introduction, Halacha L'Maisa, tells a very interesting story. That's probably an understatement. We know in history, it's a Malachim Aleph, Perek Yud Aleph, that Yoav, the general Yoav, although he destroyed Edom, but he kept the Nekevus alive. So David asked him, don't you know this is a mitzvah of Mechias HaMolek? Why did you keep the Nekevus alive? He says, what do you mean? I learned it in the Cheder. Timcha Ezach HaMolek. He goes, really? The Rebbe taught as you? Go find out. Don't you know it's Zecher, not Zachar? Your Rebbe made such a mistake? It can't be. So Yoav quickly ran to his rebbe and he asked him innocently, what did you teach us on that pasuk? So he said, Timche Zocha Molek. So he wanted to kill him. So he said, what, you're killing your own rebbe? So he goes, yes, it's a pasuk in Yirmiyah. Oror oisa moleches Hashem remiyah. Curse is the one that does moleches Hashem. The Radak teaches to lashon of riffoin. You're not doing a good job. So Rebbe said, like, pretty matter of factly, I would rather you be oiv on a oror than kill me. Like, don't kill me. So the Gemara says a two pshatim, but we paskin like the first shot. He taka killed his rebbe. He violated oror oisim oleches Hashem remiyah. But what's interesting is that this pasuk is the yesod of chinuch. Let's leave the oror part out of it, okay? But let's look at the midah toiva. When someone asks you, what do you do? Oh, I work for a firm. Okay, that's true. If a mechanech is asked what he does, he's working for the bnei Shalom. It's moleches Hashem. A rebbe is doing the moleches Hashem. And that's why if there's any chesaron, it could be oror and it could be chayav misa. A wonderful chizik to those that are on the front lines, those on ground zero. They are doing moleches Hashem. You'll ask me why? That doesn't need a hezbollah. How many chazal do we know how much the Bernstein wants Torah to be taught? And they're doing just that. So that's why Lamaisa, a Melamed's job is a moleches Hashem. And that's why there's so much importance to it. Machrim, if there's no Melamed, because the world can't be without that Melamed. But also we see the very steep price we pay if there's any mistakes. I mean, this Yoav killed his own rebbe. Yoav killed his own rebbe because he was negligent. Zoktim Maral and Chedush Agadas and Bava Basra. But what do you mean? The rebbe was not amazed. He was not it's in a mistake. So he says very simply, a mistake in Torah is apikorsis. And basically, Torah could bring the biggest bracha, he says, or if it's not learned properly, the biggest klola. In other words, in teaching Torah, the Baruch Shalom's Torah, the Dvar Hashem, there's no room for error. That's it. It can't be. Because, again, chinuch is la'olam voed. So either you perpetuate the values of Torah, or the Melamed Chas v'Shalom perpetuates a toyus. A toyus in the Dvar Hashem. And that's Dr. Maral, also in that same sugya, the Shigas Talmud Oila Zodin. And he says it pretty bluntly, if he feels he can't do it, then don't do it. That's the oldest truth. If you can't be a Melamed, if you can't learn every sugya properly, then you can't teach. But the first qualification is he has to be a bar hachi. And the price we pay, chas v'shalom, is even to the extent of oror, and even as we saw from Yoav chayav misa. But what's more interesting, the Mechab and Sif Yud Zayin applies this pasuk, which you'll soon see is the yesod of Hilchas Melamdim in different contexts. Zok the Mechab and Siman Yud Zayin, Melamed Tinoikis Shemaniach HaTinoikis V'Yaitze. He has to take care of something, and he has to talk to a Rebbe, and the Rebbe's in the hall. So he goes, okay, Kindlach, you just chazer over the pasuk, I'll be right back, stay in your seat. And he runs out to tell the Rebbe something. So, wishful thinking, they say in America. Stay in your seat, sure. They stay in the seat. Chazer over the pasuk. It's not just the bittul Torah. It's not just the lack of chayshim mishpat. Don't forget, he's getting paid to teach the time that he's teaching. You can't run out, tell him Melamed something. I mean, if it's important, that's one thing. But it's time for your convenience. So the Mechaber says, Melamed Tanoik Shemniach HaTanoikis V'Yaitze, Oisha Oisa Molacha Acheres Imam, also on see, that's something else. Oisha Misrashel Bilimudei, Hareze Bechlal Ora Oisa Molechas Hashem Remiyah. The Mechaber applies what the Gemara learns going on a Rebbe that taught Zochar instead of Zeichar, that's Chayiv Misa, is a Rebbe that's not faithful to his job, even a moment or two. The lack of chashivus, the lack of achrayis, the merapi yodov is Ora Moleches, Oisa Moleches Hashem B'Remiyah. Because don't forget, even though it's a moment or two, but that moment or two is so important, it overrides Binyan Beis HaMikdash. So why are you taking advantage of a moment or two? The pasuk is not talking only if the Rebbe gets paid and is chayshim mishpah, which is true. Even if he doesn't get paid, but he has now the tzayin kachim, he has now the talmid beis rabban, and that would be ois melechas Hashem b'remiyah. Now, of course, the rebbeim get paid, so there's a chayshim mishpah issue. But besides that, there is the melechas Hashem b'remiyah. The goyin on this mechaba sends us to Gemara in Bava Basra Chesed Amud Beis. What's the story there? An incredible story. Reb Shmuel Bar Shilois was once seen by someone it was in a garden. So he goes, when did you stop teaching? Aren't you supposed to be in your classroom? He said, it's 13 years that I stopped teaching, but then, since from then, Ad Hayom Hazeh, Hashtanami Daita Aluveyu. In other words, as the Meiri explains, a Rebbe, even if he's not in the classroom, he has to be thinking of his talmidim. So this Reb Shmuel Bar Shilois was such an incredible mechanach. He left the classroom 13 years ago, but he was still thinking of his talmidim. So the Goyin puts the two together. You have to be connected with the talmid at all times. So obviously, to disconnect, to walk out of the class and do something else, that's the greatest chsaron in being a Melamed. The Marsha on this Gemara learns, a Rebbe, even when he's not in the classroom, has to be a roya ve'ein nira. At least be focused. So obviously this speaks volumes of what a Melamed is. Zok the Beis Yosef, an hour simulation remains. Same thing he says in Kesef Mishnah and a Sefer Beis Gimel on the Rambam. From here we see that any Dov HaGoyrim shelo yedagdeg b'tinoikos is already a remiyah in Melechas Hashem. Rabbi Yoina in Sefer Yira gives an example, because in a moment they can learn a mistake. So it's really a very challenging job, and that's why again a person has to be qualified. Of course, by Pekuach Nefesh or Avozna in Chelik Zayin, Simon Kufman Tess says he could, if he's a Hatzalah member, he gets an emergency call, he has to run. But the question is, should he be an Hatzalah member and a Rebbe at the same time? You know, the Sefer Chassidim, Tafsaf Chaf Aleph, he writes, someone that's very busy with people, he's a people's person, he's an askin, shouldn't be a Rebbe, because they're going to come to middle of class with emergencies. So he's going to have to respond, but he's going to have to leave his classroom. So you have to know, priorities. Avada Hatzalah is a great chiyuv and a great mitzvah, but if it means leaving his classroom, you have to know what has priority. The Mechab and Yeridei Shin Samach Aleph Sif Aleph Paskins that Tinoikish Beis Rabbi learning is so important they can't be stopped even to go to a Levai of somebody important. Levai is important, but the learning is more important. Okay, I saw the Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonnevel, the Samas Chaim, Tov Yud Ches. He says today the minig is that if needed they do go. Maybe Al Daske, he tries to find a heta. But I'll tell you what I saw from two Gedolim and Paskin the same psak. It's a chiddush. I'm not saying it has to be Lamaisa. From Nissan Karelitz and Michal Yudah Lefkowitz and this Svarim, he said a Rebbe is making a bris for his own son. And whatever logistics is, let's say it's in Lakewood and he teaches in Brooklyn or vice versa, if he makes the bris in the morning, he'll have to come late to class. And of course they're going to get a substitute, but we know substitutes for some reason don't usually work. They say if you want to be a Rebbe, don't try it by being a substitute, because it's so challenging. The boys give you a run for your money, you'll never be a Rebbe. So a substitute is often, I'm not saying always, but often not a viable option. So they both say if you're going to be late to class, make the bris in the afternoon. That's a mila. But to leave your class and miss the morning teaching for a bris, they would say make it in the afternoon. Again, I don't know if this is halacha l'maisa, but it's definitely the das Torah of some gedolei yoyla, because being there is the most important part of a mechanech. I saw a Michal Yudah in the same sefer. This is in the sefer Darkei Chaim Zamid Kuf Lamed Zayin. A Maggid Shir asked him that he was given the kibbut of being a sandik, Maggid Shir L'Tzi'irim, which is like a Masifta age, but it'll be 10 minutes late for the shir. So he said, give up the sandikoyis and be on time for the shir. Now, I don't know if we would do that, Pashat Al to cover it a bit, but it's interesting, the priorities. Another important, of course, obvious lesson in a Melamed is to be well prepared. That we see from the story. This Yoyev's Rebbe obviously didn't prepare enough. He had you come to teach Zochar Moleg, but Lamaisa, of course, we prepare, and it's very important to prepare, but very often a Melamed has a busy schedule. He's looking forward to making a chasana, Sheva Brachas. So Avadi, you have to make a chasana, Sheva Brachas. But you have to be prepared in advance. No, you're going to have a challenging week. Be ready in advance. Because when a Melamed is prepared, you should know the biggest yisoid in chinuch, hatzlach in chinuch, is when a Rebbe has the material, kemunach bekufsa. He has it, he could give it over, he can make it exciting. If he's not clear in it, it doesn't come out good. Being prepared is extremely negeya. To the yisoid of chinuch. I heard from one of Shovavim's talmidim, Nissan Quinn Zechayim Levracha. Shovavim came in to give he used to give a tilim shir occasionally, and he came in, opened up the tilim, he looked at it and says, Bachim, I didn't prepare for this, I thought I'll give it, I'm not giving it, and he closed the tilim. He wouldn't give a shir unprepared. Now, a person like that, with talmid like he had, they had ability to, okay, so go bris med shall learn. But rebbeim of younger children, they can't say, I'm not prepared, I'm not teaching today. So there has to be that focus. Another point, of course, is to be on time. Now again, it's just a minute or two he's late, but a minute or two is a minute or two. The Shach in Chashivus but Shin Lam Gimel Sif Katan Chavav, he says a Melamed is always considered Davar Ovid Shebechol Eis V'Rega, that the talmid goes bottle is abseided loyhada. A few minutes late is not just a few minutes late, it's a few minutes of Torah's Hashem. But more than that, a few minutes times 25 talmidim, or 30, or today it's even 40. It's a different share. L'maisa it adds up. Rav Moshe in Yeridei Chel Gav Kuf Lamed Ches, Kol Melamed Mechuyev Shleilevat Afilu Mashu Mimashe Ein Sarach L'Tinoikos. Whatever has to be taught, the Rebbe has to be there promptly and punctually. Now, of course, it's also a terrible chinuch for the children when the Rebbe is late. You know, if he can be late, why can we be late? So obviously this is understood. I remember like yesterday, Pam told us, he used to teach first the Masif, the Tarvadas, then he went to Besmedish, and his manal was Shagga Feivel Mendelowitz. Shagga Feivel lived in the Bronx, and the yeshiva was in Williamsburg. It was a great traveling time from Bronx to Williamsburg, and Shagga Feivel was always early. And every day before 9, a few minutes before 9, he looked almost agitated. He would pace back and forth. He looked very impatient because he couldn't wait for the Torah factory to start. He couldn't wait till the yeshiva to start. He would pace back and forth like there's something bothering him, and came 9 o'clock and the yeshiva would connect. He would stand by the door. Any Rebbe that came late, he would take out his watch and show it to him, and it wouldn't happen again. Pam said he lived then in Brownsville to Williamsburg was also Mahalach, 2 trains on a Sunday morning, and sometimes plus the train didn't come. But no matter how little he was late, even a few minutes, he got the reminder. He showed him his watch. So Avada coming late is, besides the Chayshim Mishpat issue, is a bad chinuch, and also it's Pasha Dizman. I Baruch Hashem Mozaych to make chasanas, and numerous times rebbeim that teach together with me, they either didn't come at all or they left right away. They said, I'm sorry, I have to teach tomorrow. And I said, you're doing the right thing, trust me. You have no right to stay by a chasana late if you have to teach the next morning. So being mishtatev in a simcha is a wonderful thing, but at what cost? In fact, it seems all paiskim agree. Let's say a Rebbe woke up late one morning. He woke up and it's time to go in a few minutes he has to be in the classroom. So Rav Moshe in Arachayim Chel Dal Sadik Aleph Sif Katan Beis says he not only is allowed to, he's mechuyev just to say the bare minimum, Baruch Shem Ashri Yishtabach Shmay Nesra, and go to the class. Later you'll wear a Beinu Tam Tefil and you'll say Karbonis. The Halicha Shloima and the Heit HaZayin says it's even mutter dam bichidus if need be. Remember, says in Chaban Shulchan Aruch Ramah Kuf Vav Aleph, if he learned with other people, he doesn't stop learning. He doesn't stop learning to daven because the Tam Torah the Rabbim. But it seems pashut that a Rebbe has to know his priorities, to come late because he wants to catch up on all the wonderful things, the Kabbanis and Animam and everything, Tam children. But that could be later. I saw 2 Gedolim quoting the Chazon Ish. A Rebbe woke up really late, and Mamash had to be in the classroom in 5 minutes. So he should, of course, say Birchas HaTorah and go to teach. He could daven even after Zman Tefillah if need be. Now the Chazon Ish probably in his lifetime never davened after Zman Tefillah. But if a rebbe comes late to class, that doesn't justify coming late. So basically, it has to be what Mr. Sharm speaks to Mishkal HaChasidus. In fact, we find even more than that. The Ramah in Sif Yud Zayin, and it's also in Archaim Tafkuf Ayin Aleph Si Beis. And listen to the way the Chazal cherished the Melamed's role. A Melamed has no heter to fast, even though he's doing it for good reason. For example, he might have yahrtzeit, Shovavim, tshuva, he wants to fast Bahab, unless it's the Dalet HaNiyos and of course Tisha B'Av. But basically, and Yom Kippur of course, if I'm not teaching anyhow, but the main Taniyos, he's mechuyev to fast, but beyond that he's not allowed to. We know the tremendous schus of a tainus, ki'ilu, he becomes a korban himself, very nice. But as we know, when a person is hungry, he's not functioning fully. And very often when a person's hungry, he's irritable, he's not himself. And who's the kapara handle? The talmid. So it's even also to fast, which is a great schus. That's important to keep that in mind. But what's probably, I should mention, what all it was saying is not only rebbeim, not only teachers, but during the summer, when today we have learning programs and day camps and camps, it's the same thing. Because there's less learning, the learning has to be a learning. You know, the formula is the rebbe has to have a commitment, a devotion that brings to perfection. Another thing, interesting, this is all in Shulchan Aruch. A rebbe has to have a good night's sleep. The Shulchan Aruch says in Sif Yud Zayin, Ein lemelamed lenora balayla yoysim idai shlo yahrtzeit b'yom lilmoid, and he repeats this in Choshen Mishpat Lamed Gimel Sif Hey. The Sambas Chaim in Reish Lamed says a chiddush. He's allowed to wake up early to say slichas. Why? Because that's understood as part of his job. He's allowed to come to yeshiva after saying slichas. But stam, to stay up late, be tired, he's not doing his job. That's remiyah. But here's a chiddush, but it's not a chiddush. A melamed, very often, there's masa eseg amanoichel levesi. I'm putting all my koiches in teaching, and it's a full-time job, no doubt about it. When am I going to learn? I can't be an amoritz my whole life. It's a wonderful question. He wants to decide, like he needs, let's say, typically 6 hours of sleep. So he'll go stay up an extra hour and he'll learn a daf yomi, whatever he wants to. After all, chayecha koidmin. The Sefer Chassidim in Tov Sof Chaf Al, one of the Gedolei Rishonim, Yehuda Chassid Vayto, he says, Al yoyim ha'odam hoyel va'ani melamed, and therefore I'm busy by day, eshkem ve'elmo la'atzmi ba'boika. You can't do that. Because if you're going to be tired, if you're not going to be fully functional with your talmidim, you're doing an avla. Because now your job is to teach. You want to become a rashiva, that's your option. You want to learn a koyel, that's your option. But to teach and not give the talmidim the full koyches is a breach in the job. Rapam said this in Machanchim once. He said, when I first started teaching, I had the same problem. And I tried to learn simultaneously, but it didn't work. And he said a famous verse from the Panim Yafos in Parshas Vayera, then you should learn from him. Now, which Rebbe could we say is Doimah to Malach? So he said, yeah. This, in one respect, we have to be Doimah to a Malach. What's the Malach's uniqueness? It has one shlichus. A Rebbe that's living his life with one shlichus, him you can learn from. If the Rebbe has other interests, even the interest to finish Shas, that's wonderful. But you can't do it. Again, if you can't do it, don't do it. Paman often quote what the Rambam writes when the Ravid asked a question and the Rambam felt he was wrong. So he says, that Baal Molocha Achas, he got me again. What's that? The Rambam was busy. He was the Sultan's personal physician. He had 2 jobs. The Ravid was Kulei Torah. And he says that Baal Molocha Achas, he got me again. A Rebbe has to be a Baal Molocha Achas. And then Kula Hai V'Ulai. We know how difficult it is today. Every talmid is a full-time job. So if you give it all you've got, hopefully you'll be matzliach. But if he's divided, he has 2 jobs, or has 2 focuses, it doesn't work. Now, I should mention, again, just mentioning, I'm not telling anybody what to do. There's a whole sugya in halacha if a Rebbe is allowed to have a second job. The Mechaber says in Sif Yud Zayin, Oisha Asim Olacha Acheres. So it's not clear what he means. Does that mean B'Shasi's teaching is doing something else? But there are more in Chashivus, but Shinam Megimel Hey, V'Asa Lasois Malachtoi Im Halimud. Zokte Meiri, he has to give his full attention to the talmidim. But it seems also that it means a person shouldn't have a second job. Because he has a second job, that means he's dividing himself. Is there enough to divide for 2 jobs? Now, Lamaisa, ideally that's the way it should be. But a hechrich lo yaguna, and ain't done an efsha mishi'i efsha, and unfortunately if he can't make ends meet from his salary, he has no choice. Baruch Hashem, today there's a wonderful movement, I could say, many yeshivas to bring up the salaries that the rebbeim get to make it doable. Don't forget that teaching our children, they have to be able to survive. Also, Lidach Gisa, there are shorter, especially from Sifter rebbeim, there are shorter for Seder's, they have a second Seder. So if you could do both, no, fine. But at least in Ashkafa, there has to be a Baal Malacha Achas to succeed. And I think, I'm not telling rebbeim what to do, but I'm telling me as a parent and parents, if we want the rebbeim to mechanech our children successfully, they have to have the ability to do that. If they're going to be busy, juggling jobs, then they don't have the ability. So it has to be our achrayus that the rebbeim have the ability to do the job properly. Another point, getting back to our sugya of Oisem Oleches Hashem, which is pashut, but has to be mentioned. A rebbe picking up a phone in the middle of the class is a poor message. Besides that, it's bittul zman, but it's a poor message. Of course, if there's a pekuach nefesh, if he has a sick parent, etc., that's different. But even then, he should explain to his talmidim why he's doing this. Another halacha, which I'm going to spoil from, the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Yud Aleph said the following: Yoshev u'malamdim kol hayoim u'ktsas halayla k'dei lechancham lilmei b'yom u'valayla. It's clear. I don't know if it means kol hayoim literally, but there was a much longer day of chinuch when in those days. In fact, the Mechaber says, and I quote in Sif Yud Beis, Lo yavadlu tinoikos klal chutz mi'erev Shabbos ve'erev Yom Tiv b'soif hayoim. In other words, the only days off was Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tiv. I mean, forget about Bein Hazmanim and midwinterification and Isru Chag and 2-day Isru Chag. It didn't happen. In fact, you look in Shulchan Aruch, it's as clear as day that they had yeshiva on Shabbos. That's not my chiddush. See if you're down, the Mechaber says, don't learn with the talmidim new material on Shabbos because it's going to be too much of them. Just learn chazer over the old things. That means they had basically a 7-day week, except for Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov. Now, again, I'm not saying anything. Lamaisa, I guess we have to know al pi darkei what children need. It's it's been becoming a shorter term. But whatever the case is, at least the days we're in the classroom, we should be there. Rav Moshe in Choshen Mishpat Aleph Simon Nutes would ask a very sad question: if rebbeim are not getting paid on time, if they're allowed to strike. It used to be a metzias. He says, what's the head to the strike? If you're not getting paid, you could go take him to court. But how do you leave talmidim without a rebbe? There has to be that oisem oleches Hashem, that focus. Now, L'idach Gisa, the rebbeim are doing incredible work. It's really a full-time job. Rabbi Yakov was once asked by a certain yeshiva, they wanted to put a system that the rebbe has to punch in when he comes in the morning with the clock, when he comes and leaves. Rabbi Yakov was horrified. He says, do you think a rebbe's job is 9 to 3? A rebbe works the whole day. It's a chutzpah to ask him to punch in. And I could say, Taka, that's the Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Shilas was a rebbe 13 years later because he was focused. And I want to add, if my memory doesn't fail, Rabbi Yankov's Shiva in Tarvadas, so his son Rabbi Shmuel Zayin spoke, and he said this story. He once, Rabbi Yankov was already retired for the night, and he came down in the night clothing to the dining room and wrote something down and went back upstairs to sleep. So they said they were afraid to ask him what that was, but he explained. He said, I just thought of something to do for a talmid. I don't want to forget. So I want to write it down tonight to do it first thing in the morning. See, a rebbe's job is eternal. A rebbe's job is always. And that's really the sensitivity of why we have to understand that a rebbe has to have the ability, the financial ability to do it. There's another sensitive halacha, but I think it's a tremendous point. It's not lamaisa at all. But the Mechaber says it in Sif Yud Ches Beis on Gemara in Bava Basra. If a rebbe is teaching and someone else comes along who could do a better job, then you replace the first rebbe with the second one. Now all the achrayim ask, what does that mean? A fire, even a regular worker, kolshkin a rebbe, and it's a share for itself. It's not lamaisa. But the point is, Chazal wanted as much as it could be, the rebbe should be perfection. Again, commitment, devotion, and perfection. And ad k'dei kach, if you see a rebbe's better, the children have to have the best. But basically, at least the focus should be to do the best we could do. Just a few questions about the classroom. So Lamaisa, I think the main point has to be, Rebbe has to understand what he's doing is Lifnei Hashem, like the Zoya says. The Chazaynish in Amud B'toch in Klal Dalid Ois Tezayim writes, the Yisoid HaChinuch is not so much do as I say, but do as I do. And he says very clearly, if the Rebbe doesn't have the proper midas and Yiras Shamayim, he's making more damage than good. He says, because the talmidim are manchil the midas rois, and the yirba toldoisav kidmusa ikutzalmai. Very sharp lashonis. But he says that really chinuch, the most effective chinuch, like they say in English, is not do as I say, but do as I do. So the five amendments would say it succinctly, most of chinuch is not taught, it's caught. Good midas is contagious. Bad midas is also contagious. I think chinuch is the right definition. Chinuch is a collection of inspirations. A moment. You remember? Everybody can say, well, I remember my rebbe when he said something, he did something. That's lasting. That's really kechav na'olam voed. And that's what Rebbe has to know. You know, we all say stories when we were about the Gedolim, they did this in a moment, he thought what to say. Guess what? The Rebbe has to know he's the Gedolim. In his Talmidim's mind, he's the Gadol, and they're watching him. And they have to be a sterling example. Rapam would say, he had a Rebbe, Abdavid Leibovich, he was Rashiv and Tarvadas, a nephew of the Chavetz Chaim. He never said the word do to a talmid, to a sif talmidim. It was always ear. And he gave a tremendous kvoid adam. He wasn't teaching kvoid adam, he was living it. He would never call a talmid do, ear, third person, derech eretz. I guess that's why by him it was such an important thing. But a Rebbe that Chasham loses himself in class is teaching that kas is muta, chas v'shalom. You know, he could teach about Moshe, B'chal Kas, B'chal Tois, but if he loses himself, the Talmud sees that. Tom told us a story about a third grade Rebbe. And in the middle of class, a Talmud says, I'm tired of Chumash, I'm not learning Chumash, and slammed his Chumash closed. So what would the average Rebbe do? This is a rebellion, right? You got to throw the kid out. So the Rebbe said, great! When you learn when it's gishmak, it's a big mitzvah. But when you learn when it's not gishmak, it's even a bigger mitzvah. Let's learn now when you're tired of it, and you'll get so much more schar. And you know what the child did? He started learning. You have to think in a moment. Don't lose yourself in that weak moment. There are so many stories we remember of Gedolim. Now, the Rebbe has to know he's the God in the Talmud's eyes. Rabbi Yakov said the story about his son Moshe to tell the story that once he did an Nissan the Rabbanan, doesn't say what, but his father Rabbi said, Moshe, mein entire Kind soll es leben und gesund sein, ob das jetzt overgewen auf an Nissan the Rabbanan, and he took him and he hit him, and Rabbi Yakov said that the Moshe said, we can zen funken, sparks going out of that hit. He whacked him, trust me, he whacked him, but he did it with a hava. He didn't lose himself. He was in full control. Now, Lamaisa today we don't hit, but Lamaisa it has to be with the control, with the Messinus. Because Lamaisa, this is what the Talmud remembers. Another important mashal. Taking away an item from a child. So, Api Allah it's muta. In fact, the Paiskim say, we find more Makish that hit a child. In fact, even killing a child, if by mistake is considered Oisik mitzvah. So take him in a chayfetz is mutter. But in the child's mind, I heard this more than once, parents told me that my Rebbe is a ganef. Now, is he a ganef? Of course not. But how does he know? You have to explain to him, I'll take it, I'll give it back to you later, for your benefit. But Rav Destel once said, a child's toy boat is like an adult's real boat. And it's true. Taking away the toys of the child is taking away his neshama. It has to be done with a cheshbon, explain it to him, and give it back to him. It's time to keep it for no reason. There's no heter for that. Another point. Something happened terribly wrong in the class, and the rebbe has no idea who did it. Can he force a child, you must tell me who did it, or else I'm going to send you home? Because the child knows. So Moshe in Yardei Chelik Beisim and Kuf Gimel says it's mechua for the rebbe to do that. It's disgusting. You're training him to talk Lashon Hara. So someone asked him, but Lamais is Tayelis. So in Chelik Dal Sim and Moshe again came back to it and says, yes, you have a Tayelis, you'll find who did it. But what about the Chsarin? You're teaching a child to talk Lashon Hara. Now many later Paiskim say, what do you mean? But it's Tayelis, Tayelis is Mutter. But you look at Ramoshe's Lashon, it's Pash, he's talking about younger children. A young child doesn't understand a Chafetz Chaim's Hetla Tayelis. He knows one thing, my Rebbe forced me to say Lashon Hara, to be a Moisa. That's a bad chinuch. Now if the Rebbe could explain to the child, and he's old enough to understand the Heta, fine. But again, this is an opportunity of the mechanech the children, not giving them the wrong impression. It has to be a chinuch with a cook for the future. Someone asked me, Taka, he said, today we don't hit talmidim, but they used to hit talmidim. Are we smarter than them? The Gemara says that it's a mitzvah. The Mechaber quotes it. Are we smarter than Chazal? I said, Chas v'shalom. We're following Chazal. Because don't forget, Chazal, or the Chacham Mikol Adam put it, the side of chinuch is chanoich l'nar al pi darkoi. The children of today are not the children of yesterday. Now you'll say, why that is? That's the Baruch Cheshbon. But Lamaisa, our children are much more sensitive. And if it doesn't work, then it can't be the right thing. Someone told me the most incredible Yisoid, Rav Steinman once said that in everything Yiddishkeit, Messiah is of paramount importance. But there's one thing that we don't follow Messiah, and that's chinuch. If you're teaching children 100 years ago, then you can follow the Messiah. But today's children are different. And tomorrow's children might be different. Chinuch is not Messiah. Chinuch is chanoich l'nar al pi darkoi. And the emphasis, that's why hitting, of course, is not done. But the truth is today, verbal hitting is probably worse. Because the Chacham Mikol Adam said, Yesh boita kamat pirais charav. The Goyin says that dibur hara, a sharp word, a painful word, is worse than akah. Because you hit someone on the hand, so you hit his hand. But verbal abuse passes the whole person. You're a bad boy. That's a psul haguf. You invalidated the child. Hit him on the hand and his hand hurts. And when you hit a child on the hand, it goes away. But verbal abuse, verbally hurting someone, lasts. So you have to be very careful when you criticize how to do it. Probably the best eitzah, what the Shlar wrote a long time ago, which is today is so much more so true. He teaches the pasuk, Al toichach letz pen yisna ekam. Don't tell a child you're bad, because he doesn't want to hear that, and it'll become bad. Hoichach l'chacham v'yavekam. It's not talking about give mussar to the good child only, because the bad child needs the mussar. Hoichach l'chacham means look at the child, the bad child, and see the good in him. It says, you're a good boy, why'd you do that? You're not a liar, why did you lie? It's pastinish, you're better than that. So it's talking about the same child, the bad child. Hoichach l'chacham, the good in the child, and he'll love you. Because if you tell him he's good, he'll be good. You tell him he's a liar, he'll be a liar. That's the chinuch of appealing to the good in the child. Rabbi once told me, Kedarka b'kodesh, there are different kinyanim. You can be kind of child. You can be kind of child with chazaka, but not such a good kinyan. Better make Mashiach, draw him close to you, and then make Hagbah, and pick him up. That's our Messiah. But probably the most important halacha, is dealing with a difficult child. Talmid, a difficult in Kishrin, or he's he gives you a run for your money, a rebellious child. So in Shulchan Aruch it's clear, now with Simon, Reish Mem Hey Sif Tes, that you can't just get rid of a child. Keep him in class, hopefully he'll improve. But what's what's the way to be kind to that child, not just to keep him in class. So the emes is that there's a word, I think, is the yisoid of chinuch, tatzlach and chinuch abanim and talmidim all in one. We find in the beginning of Parshas Shmois, when Moshe was born, so Basri Bas Pare wanted that he should nurse, but he would nurse from a mitzvah from a goyish woman. Why not? Pesha also dabe mashchina. A pet that's going to talk to the shchina should nurse from a mitzvah. So she had to get a Yiddish, and that was, of course, part of the Hatzalah. This is quoted in Shulchan Aruch and Yeridea, Pei Aleph Siv Zayin, that a Jewish child, should not nurse from a goita. So Bianca Kamenetsky once asked the obvious question: Moshe Rabbeinu was a pesha os dabe mashchina. That's true, but why isn't it get for me and for my child or your child? And the teretz, he said, is obvious. Al pi halacha, not just al pi hashkaf, al pi halacha, every child has to be looked at as a potential peh she'os l'dabe mashchina. Pilaploim. Halacha l'maisa. If a rebbe could see the chacham in the child, if a rebbe could see the peh she'os l'dabe mashchina in the child, he'll find eitzes. And I once said, imagine the rebbe. Yesterday, who's your most difficult child? Okay, yeah. Chaim. Okay, great. What would happen if Elionov says, "Come over here, Rebbe, I want to tell you something." That Chaim, he's a bandit, right? He's going to be a gadol hador. I'm telling you, I'm Elionovi, and you're not hallucinating. Wouldn't you find the ability to connect with him if you know he's a gadol hador or a Rosh Hashiva or an Erech Balabas? When you could be royas hanoyel and see in this mischievous child the pesh azdaba shchina, then you find eitzes, and once you find eitzes, he'll respond accordingly, and that's the Melechas Hashem. A Talmid Chacham once said he came to his mashgiach of the Lomshe mashgiach, who was talking to a young child, but with great derech eretz, with great ahava. So he wasn't sure if this is a child of a big gevir or a big Rosh Hashiva. So he asked his mashgiach, "Vem is kinded us? Like, whose child is that?" So the Lomshe mashgiach was a chacham. He knew where he's coming from. He goes, "Das ist der Bar Shlam's kind. It doesn't have to be a gevir kind or a Rosh Hashiva kind. It's the Bar Shlam's child. You need more than that." When you see the Bar Shlam's child in every child, then you're doing Melechas Hashem. I remember like yesterday, it was probably 15 years ago, near my house, there was a big billboard. Now, I don't read billboards because it's usually not appropriate, but it looked like a pretty kosher picture. It looked like about 25 children, all like in one big chabura, like hugging each other, playing. It was a picture perfect of happy children. It caught my attention. I saw it was clean. So I said, "Why is this up?" And it wasn't Jewish children, but it looked like a very nice, clean picture of the, like, of happiness at its best. So I looked closely, and there's a caption. It must have been from the government. Which of these children will be a drug dealer? The world we live in, you have to have, pre-training and training to weed out the problems. But it made a murder to Geroshim. A rebbe has to have a picture of his whole class in his heart, and it has to be on the bottom, which of these talmidim will be a pesha os dabe mashchina? And the answer is each one of them. That's the yisoid of chinuch. To see in every child the potential. They say the Beis Halevi, when he would wheel around Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, he was a baby, he would say, "Cooking the vegela, who's there? The next Gadol Hador." This is what they say he said. Now, Reb Chaim was too young to understand what was going on. So why did Beis Halevi do that? He did it for himself. If you know you have the Gadol Hador as your child, so you'll work accordingly. If you see another child, another child. The yisoid of chinuch is to see in every child that's the potential Gadol Hador. When a talmid hears or feels the vibes, or Chalila gets any impression that the Rebbe thinks everybody's good except him, and he's the chutz mi'achar, the talmid is doomed. The yisoid of chinuch is to believe in the child. Maybe be royas and that one day your anical will come up and say, my Rebbe spoke out something you said a long time ago. He remembers you said it. Zayd, he said it in your name. Because things change. But when a person sees the potential of every child, then he could do the Melechas Hashem b'kedusha v'tahara, and it could be Zoycha Taka Kechavim la'olam v'od. I'm going to talk to you all.
Shem Egenshir, I'd like to thank you of Smith for today's share. To have the great solicitor sponsoring your share, please call Egenshir 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Bez Hashem, after recess, the Rebbe will say a sikkim of today's share. Melamed.
Good.
Chanani ben Akashim, Moshe Bochel, Zakis, the Shovavim, Hibim, Talmid, Shanem, Adonai, Chofes, Masidke, Yagol, Tevi, Yade, Skado, Viskade, Shmei Rabba, Yamad, Nasiam, Mofus, Yas, Konev, Garam, Shiche, Ayek, Megan, Chayel, Beis, Yisrael, Bagol, Makar, Mama, Shmei Rabba, תמיד אתה אומר, כמה דוס מראה שגבר סודם למסע ומסע, לא נולד חוי שמרה בגין וסבח מחי ונותן ויחם כל המבון ושמע ויער ומאמן שמרה ושמע וחיים טוב להם הכל יסוד ומאמן ושלום רואי מוב יעשום עלינו הכל יסוד ומאמן.
Shiva once told me, not Gamba, but she said Mashiach has been not going about it.
Oh, good.
Okay.
No.
You asked all class to find the seats for the sikkim. Show us Melamed.
Okay, just let's chaz what we learned today. The side of chinuch is keichav no'olam voed. As we said that this is doing the melechas of the rebbeim shalom. Really, the chi of teaching is on the parent, and that's why the parents have to be fully involved at all times. But there's a mitzvah deraisa of shenant milvanecha elu talmidim. Melamed in any age has that special distinction of doing Melechas Hashem. The Makara Melamdim is the times of the second bias, where there was a takana to have every single city, and that's why Ad Hayoim, a city without a Melamed is either Machriv or Machrim. A Melamed has priority even over the only mikveh in the city. Al Tigid b'Mashiach, there are different explanations, but it's the child is looked at as the special one. Then we understand why there's such a focus in halacha. The kiyum of the world is Torah of Tinokesh Beis Rabbin, even though it's not a mitzvah of Oisa. It's even though it's not a cheftzah, it's not the kiyum mitzvah, it's the cheftzah of the mitzvah. The binyan Beis Hamikdash will not be a justification to stop learning with talmidim. So obviously, when we are in the classroom, to give it the chashivus of every single moment. The Makabel Panei Ashchin in the classroom, because that's where the rebbeim has his nachas, like the Zayah says, the rebbeim revetes al baneha is going on in the classroom. The Shabesh the Kivan to all is a very big takana. The price is Chayiv Misa Rachmano Litzlan. Yoyev's Rebbe was Chayiv Misa because he left a mistake. Leave Talmidim to go out, of course, is wrong. To be late is also wrong, obviously. It has to be connected at all times. You have to understand why they had to go for Levaya when needed, but basically the Rebbe should be there and not to stay by the end of the Chasana, not to stay at the end of the bris, be on time, even give up Sandakais, we saw him, even give up davening B'tziba, even davening after this man, but he has to be on time. Besides the Chayshim Mishpat, it's also the Limud HaTorah that's so very important. The Rebbe that woke up late should find an Eitzah, but he has to have breakfast also. That I forgot to mention, Moshe, you would say that he has to have time for Pas Shachris also, if he's hungry, as we saw in Allot Fast. There's an Issa of not being with the full of koiches, that's really doing the job, Birmiyah. We said that basically, originally there was a time that chinuch was 7 days a week, and even except for Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov. Okay, today we have the Bein Hazmanim, but it has to be that the time that we're there, it has to be mamish with the ganze ganzkeit, like they say. The concept of a rebbe should be one job, to be that Baal Malacha Achas. He should be like a Malach Hashem Tzavakos. No, if he has to have two jobs, it shouldn't interfere with the first one. But basically, the classroom is a time of giving over impressions. More than what I tell you, but what I do, and therefore the Rebbe has to be very careful the way he reacts, not to show kas, not to lose himself, not to take away something when it's not justifiable, when the child doesn't understand why you're confiscating his item, not to force a child to talk Lashon Hara unless you explain to him that it's not Lashon Hara. And most importantly, as we said, the hitting with words is not working. You have to appeal to the good in the child, and most important, to see the future of every child, to see every child as a pesha osla b'mashchina, that one day taka you'll have that nachas.